An 8-year-old boy and his 10-year-old brother were causing their mother's so much trouble that the mother was at the end of her rope. So like all good mothers do to correct the misbehavior in their boys, they call the preacher. And she tells the preacher, I need you to talk to my boys and figure out a way to help them to stop misbehaving. So the preacher said, I got the perfect solution. I'll let the boys know that God is with them all the time. He's watching all the time. And if the boys understand that God is always there, then their misbehavior will stop. They'll start behaving a little bit better. So the preacher, of course, called the boys in, and the 8-year-old was sitting outside his office. The 10-year-old is called into his office, and the preacher looks at the 10-year-old boy and he says, hey, son, do you know where God is? And the 10-year-old boy is sitting there and just remained quiet, didn't say a word, and a little bit scared, and the preacher says, son, I said, do you know where God is? And again, the boy's just sitting there, not really saying a whole lot, so just kind of a little bit nervous. And the preacher asked the boy a third time, son, do you know where God is? At that, the boy jumped up out of his chair. He ran out of the office. He grabbed his 8-year-old brother and he said, come on, we got to get out of here. God is missing and they think we did it. Thank you for laughing at that. I wasn't sure how that would go. We know that God's not missing. As we've journeyed through the story, we've learned that God is active and alive and well. And there's a song by the Newsboys that goes, God's not dead, he's surely alive. He's living on the inside, roaring like a lion. And my question to you this morning is, God roaring like a lion in your life? Do you feel his presence? Do you sense what he is doing in your life to make a difference in this world? He's done everything he can to bring us back into his presence, and we know that God is doing what he can through people. It's through people that he gets the job done. Now, throughout my lifetime, I've met some what you might call spiritual giants, people that you would look up to in the faith. For a period of about 3 years, I worked as a promoter, part of my job at the last church I was at, and I would bring in these big-name Christian artists and comedians and things like that, and I really kind of enjoyed that because they were some people that I really looked up to. People like songwriter and singer Mark Schultz. Got to sit down and have a conversation with him, man. It's kind of neat that somebody would like that would devote some time to talk to me, and Christian comedian Tim Hawkins was probably my all-time favorite, just to sit down and talk with him. And I admire these guys so much because I look at them and I think, you know what, there's really not a whole lot of ordinary about them. When we think about people like this, we think, man, these people are extraordinary. And maybe you've met some people like that along the way. We think of other Christian people like Max Lucado, great Christian author and preacher. Or how about, what's his name? I'm like at a blank now. Billy Graham. Anybody ever meet Billy Graham? I'm just kind of curious. Shake his hand. A couple of you. That's excellent. That's a guy I'd love to shake hands with and talk with a little bit, But we look at these people and we look at them and say, there is nothing ordinary about people like this. I think about people like Tim Tebow. Every chance he got, it seemed like in the media, he would exemplify his faith in God, and he did all he could to try to lead his teammates to Jesus Christ. And I admire that kind of faith and devotion to Jesus Christ. And I think it takes an extraordinary man or woman to do things like this. And meeting people like Mark Schultz and Tim Hawkins for me was very exciting. These men are so dedicated to the Lord, and they're so on fire for Jesus Christ and spreading the good news of Jesus Christ wherever they go. And if you've met someone like that these men and women of the faith, spiritual giants, these extraordinary men and women, they mark you, don't they? I mean, they kind of leave this impression after having met them on your life, and they leave this effect on you for maybe a few days or a few weeks, maybe even a couple months, and they make an impression on your life. I want to introduce you to someone this morning, however, that isn't ordinary, nor is he extraordinary. In fact, this man is in a league all his own when you look at him. There has never been, nor will there ever be, anyone like he. he is a league of his own. This man is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He was present at creation. He was born of a virgin, grew up in a small town, worked as a carpenter. He didn't own a home. He didn't own anything, really, for the Son of Man had no place to lay his head. His enemies hated him. His followers loved him. He was condemned to death, but he rose from the grave, and his name is Jesus. And I got to ask, what made Jesus so different from everybody else? As you look at his life, how come he made such a big difference in people's lives? And over the next few minutes, I want to be looking at his life and what he did. And I'm hoping that this morning you'll see Jesus maybe in a little bit different light than you've seen him so far in your life's journey. I hope that you'll meet Jesus all over again, because when you do, he will leave a mark on you that doesn't just last for a few days or a few weeks or even a couple months, but a lifetime. It lasts a lifetime. He leaves a mark on you that will change you forever, and you'll never be the same again. And we may have some people in here that are kind of new to following Jesus, and you're kind of checking this out and trying to figure all this out. Here's the deal. I can't make you love Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, I can't say, oh, you must love him. I mean, this is your duty. I can't make you do that. But here's what I can do. In the words of Andy Stanley, I can help set up the first date. I like that. I can help set up the first date so you can get to know Jesus a little bit better. And that's what I want to try to do this morning. I want to acquaint you with the Son of God who walked this earth for 33 years. And we look at him and we realize this is just no ordinary man. So the first thing I want you to see as we meet Jesus, if you write this in your notes this morning, is that Jesus was no ordinary teacher. He was no ordinary teacher. He had a way with words. People would flock to him. As you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you find that Jesus is very informative. A lot of good information he's got out there. Not only that, he's mesmerizing. People are drawn to him. And at the same time, he's quite challenging in what he has to say. The words that Jesus spoke to a lot of people were a breath of fresh air. For a lot of years now, the people were living in this law and having to follow all these rules. And Jesus kind of came and said, you know what? It's not about just following the rules. It goes a little deeper than that. And so people were like, oh, that's great. I love what he has to say, and I feel so much better. And at the same time, I feel a little bit more challenged to live my life in a different way. So his words were so different from what the religious teachers were saying. His words were so different that the crowds would flock to hear what he had to say. Every preacher's dream. I would love it if this place were filled with 1,000 people every Sunday just to hear what I had to say. Wouldn't that be great? Like, whoa, yeah, every preacher's dream. And Jesus had it. People wanted to know what he had to say. And his best known speech is found in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. We know that as the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount. I imagine that hundreds of people are gathered here at the base of this mountain, and Jesus is getting ready to speak, and they just want to hear what Jesus has to say that day. Mark Moore, Christian guy, writer, says, he describes this scene this way. He says, in this Sermon on the Mount, we have the epitome of Jesus' teaching. It was radical, it was sensible, spiritual, and almost vicious in its demolition of hypocrisy. I like that last line, let's get rid of all this hypocrisy. Let's stop playing like actors for Jesus Christ, and let's be real with each other. And that's what Jesus was trying to do. And what people heard that day on that Sermon on the Mount was so upside down from what they had been taught so far. If you think about what he had to say, who would suggest that the poor, that the meek, that the lowly, that the sorrowful would be blessed, would inherit the earth, would be comforted? There were no teachers teaching that at that time. Who could describe what the kingdom of heaven was really like other than Jesus? And so you got to ask, why would Jesus teach such things? I think it's because Jesus looked at things a little bit differently than we do. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, he sees the world a little bit differently, and we kind of get that. Yeah, Jesus, we feel like he understands who we are. So Jesus uses stories, number one, to get his points across to the people that listened. And we know these stories as what? Parables, yeah, parables. And we've got all these different parables. He told the parable of the Good Samaritan. Hey, this is good. I'm glad you're with me. Keep going. He told the parable of the prodigal son and the parable of the mustard seed. And so we have all these parables, and we identify with some of these images, and we go, wow, Jesus knows what he's doing. He's using these stories, and it helps. So Jesus would share this parable. He would then have to explain it to his followers, his disciples. But the cool thing is that Jesus went out and lived it. He wasn't just teaching it, he was living it. And his goal was to leave his mark on his followers, on his disciples. And that's how people lived back then. People were all about, I'm following this rabbi or that rabbi. I really like this guy's teaching, so I'm gonna ride his coattails for a while and hear what else he has to say. People were really in tune with the popular rabbis of the day. And the rabbis, in the same sense, they would bring these followers along, and their goal was to teach them so well that when the rabbi was gone, his teachings would live on through his followers. And his followers would then carry that message to people that would come after them, future generations. And there's a saying in the Mishnah, which is an oral commentary of the law of Moses. And the saying goes like this: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Isn't that cool? May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. Now, kind of get this image in your head because this is kind of important. Have you ever followed someone so closely that as they're walking, they're shooting dust up off their feet and it's getting all over you and in your teeth? Anybody know what I'm talking about? No? Yes? Maybe? Especially if they're wearing flip-flops, and you're walking in the sand or whatever, and that dust is flying up. That's kind of the idea here, is that people would follow their rabbi so closely that their teachings would stick to them and be instilled in their lives, and they would follow them and teach others to do the same thing. Some of you have been following Jesus for a very long time. Some of you are like I am. I grew up in the church. I'll be 40 years old next year, and that seems like a long time. But there are those of you in this room, you grew up in the church as well. You've been a Christian for 60, 70, 80, 90 years maybe. And you've been following Jesus. And so the question I want to ask this morning is this: are you covered in the dust of your rabbi, Jesus Christ? Are you covered in his dust? I love the people's reaction to Jesus' teachings. In Mark chapter 1, verse 27, we find these words: the people were so amazed. They were so amazed at this guy that they asked each other, what is this, a new teaching with authority? He even gives orders to evil spirits, and they obeyed him. That word amazed, it appears 30 times in the New Testament. Only 3 times is it used of Jesus being amazed at something else. Just 3 times. The other 27 times this word amazed is used in the New Testament, it all refers to the people's reaction to Jesus. Jesus amazed the people with his miracles. Jesus amazed them with the way he handled criticism. He amazed them with his love and care over the outcast. He amazed them with his teachings. There was something special about this man, and Jesus used different ways to get his teachings across. He used stories. Second, he used hyperbole. Hyperbole. And this is what's really neat. Remember the comparison between the speck in someone's eye and the 2x4 in your own eye? Isn't that great? I would have loved to have been there and seen how the people's reaction, because I kind of see it this way. Like, you hear this extravagant hyperbole, this story, and you go, wow, that's kind of cool. That's going to stick with me. And the people are out running around saying, hey, you gotta hear this guy Jesus. Did you hear about the speck of sawdust and the 2x4? Oh man, that's great. I love it. And I could see the people's reaction. They were just amazed at how Jesus talked to them. He used hyperbole, he used humor, poetry, illustrations, and he referred back to the Old Testament from time to time. Jesus knew what he was doing. He was no ordinary teacher. People flocked to hear what he had to say. Second one is this, write this in your notes. Jesus was no ordinary king. He was no ordinary king. And this is important because the people of Judah had seen these kings come and go, some good, some bad. You know, they watched some kings rule with wealth and power, and they would throw these extravagant parties and just enjoy the favor of the people, while other kings they had, the people would suffer because these kings were so powerful and so atrocious that the people didn't want to have anything to do with them. But Jesus' kingdom was so different from anything that they had seen or even heard about. The people were amazed at how this guy talked about it. No king had ever talked about his kingdom the way Jesus talked about his kingdom. In Jesus' kingdom, outsiders were accepted. In Jesus' kingdom, prodigals could come back home. In Jesus' kingdom, the rejects were invited to the party. In Jesus' kingdom, people are to care for the widows and orphans. That was way out of the norm back then. They would care for widows and orphans, and they would help each other throughout difficult times. They looked out for the overlooked. In Jesus' kingdom, grace had been extended to everyone. And I ask, is this the type of church that you envision here in Barberton? I hope so, because I think that's the direction we're headed, is that people belonging to Jesus' kingdom is going to be so different and so well cared for. And I know a lot of people come into this room and you've got some heavy hearts. You know, there are things going on in your life that you're just like, man, I don't know how much more I can take. Maybe some of you don't think you're good enough to even walk in this building. You thought, man, if I walk into church this morning, the roof's going to fall in, you know. This is not good. I don't know what I'm doing here. You know, maybe you feel like you've got a lot of sin in your life. There's no way that God can forgive you because you just can't push it aside. You keep giving in, right? Maybe some of you feel like an outsider or an outcast, maybe even a prodigal. Some of you need some big-time help in your life. You know, where am I going to do? You don't know how you're going to pay the rent next month. You've been diagnosed with some kind of illness or disease. Health isn't very good right now. Some of you are in maybe some pretty messed up relationships. Some of you are just trying to figure out how to get through this life. What do I do? How do I make it through? Maybe you're worried that you're going to get made fun of because you're following Jesus. You know, you don't want people to know that you're a Christian, so you're like one of these undercover agents for Jesus. You know, but in Jesus' kingdom, right here, right now, this is where you belong. This is where you belong. Jesus talks about his kingdom in Luke chapter 14. They're at a banquet, and he says to the host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers or relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. Here's a glimpse into his kingdom now, verse 13. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Do you see what Jesus is getting at? Invite the outcasts. Invite those who people would kind of shove aside, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. This is a glimpse into Jesus' kingdom. No king had ever preached this before. His kingdom is so different. Everyone is welcome. Matthew chapter 9, verses 12 and 13. On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But the sick. He says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but whom? Right now, right here, is where we belong. In Jesus' kingdom. Every single one of us in this room needs Jesus so bad. I don't know how we can get through without him. Every single one of us needs this type of kingdom that Jesus rules. This is no ordinary kingdom. Jesus came to set the captives free. A lot of you are captive to sin right now. He's going to set you free. Jesus' kingdom is available to the poor, the downtrodden, and even for those who are not Jews. The result of following King Jesus is that your life will be transformed Your life will never be the same. He will leave a lasting mark on you. Chuck Colson pointed out that there have been hundreds of presidents and kings, and in times of war, they've always done the same thing. These presidents and kings have asked their subjects to go and lay down their lives for their king. But there's only one king who went out and laid down his life for his subjects. This is no ordinary king. And he's no ordinary teacher. And third, write this in your notes, Jesus was no ordinary man. This may not seem significant to you, but if you think about it, I wonder what it would have been like to be Jesus. Being both fully human and fully God at the same time. We're not talking a 50-50 split. This is no Jekyll and Hyde here. This is Jesus Christ. Think about this. He's 100% human, and at the same time, he's 100% God. That's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. What that would have been like, I don't know. But Jesus entered this world through a woman, through human birth, and lived his life as a human being. He hungered. He thirsted. He had emotions. We see it in the New Testament. He cried. John 11:35, Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He got angry. Remember when he overturned the tables in the temple? Pretty mad. He laughed. He had a good time. He was straight-faced sometimes. He had emotions. He was a human being. But at the same time, he had this divine spirit in him. 100% God at the same time. And he used his spirit, and the Gospels point out 34 miracles that Jesus performed. 34, just 34 miracles. But then 15 other occasions, the Gospels point out that, hey, he did other miracles and things that are not recorded in these Gospels. Jesus, being fully human and fully divine, made a difference to people. So he was not like any other man. He was not like anyone else who ever came around. There was something different about him, something unique, something godly, but at the same time, something very humanly. Hebrews 4:15 kind of clarifies it for us. It says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses." He knows what we're going through. We have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet was without sin. This is Jesus Christ. He knows where you're coming from. He knows what you're going through. And he can help. Jesus came to show us what would happen if we lived our lives and walked so in tune with the Holy Spirit. He showed us what that's like. How did he do that? Well, he got his marching orders from God. How often do we read in the New Testament Jesus went up on a mountainside by himself to pray? Jesus went here to pray and there to pray, and he was always talking to God, and he was always saying, I get my marching orders from Jesus, from God. He tells me what I need to do, I go and do it. And you might think to yourself, why would Jesus, being fully divine, being fully God himself, why would he need to talk to God? That doesn't make sense. Well, Jesus, remember, he came to earth as a human. He came to earth as a human. He needed to talk with God. He showed us why prayer is so important. He needed to hear from God so that he could do what God wanted him to do. How much more do we as Christians need to talk with God? If Jesus talks with God, why shouldn't we, right? Jesus was no ordinary man. He was no ordinary man. John 14:9, Jesus said, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. Who would claim that? John 8:58, before Abraham was, I am. Matthew 26:61, Jesus said, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. Matthew 26:2, Jesus said, the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. No one ever claimed what Jesus claimed. No one ever said what Jesus said. No one ever taught the way Jesus taught. No one ever did what Jesus did. Jesus was no ordinary man. As you look through the New Testament, here's what you find. He is Almighty God, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the Ancient of Days, the Anointed One, the author of our lives, the beloved Son of God, the bread of life, the bridegroom, the bright and morning star, the captain of our salvation, our great comforter, our counselor, the creator of all things, deliverer, Emmanuel, God with us, eternal, everlasting Father, faithful and true, finisher of our faith, the first and the last, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the good shepherd, the great I am, healer, the Holy One of Israel, the King of kings and Lord of lords, the Lamb of God who takes away our sin, the light of the world, the way, the truth, and the life, the living water, mediator between us and God, the only begotten Son, our Passover Lamb, the great physician, the Prince of Peace, Rabbi, our Redeemer, the resurrection and the life, the rock, the Savior of the world, the Son of the living God, the true vine, the word of life. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And if you walk out of here today without a little bit of dust on your clothes, then you haven't met Jesus. You haven't met Jesus. In Acts chapter 4, we see a couple of the apostles wandering around, they get arrested and all that good stuff. In Acts chapter 4, verse 13, here's what we read. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. See what happened here? They were covered in the dust of their rabbi, Jesus Christ. They were covered in his dust. So tell me, when people look at you, do they take note that you had been with Jesus Christ? Can they see it in your life? My dream for this congregation is that we become the light of the world for Jesus Christ in this city, in the city of Barberton, so that when people look at each of you and they look at me, they would see Jesus' mark on our lives. That's our goal. That's what we need to do. Talked last week in our congregational meeting, just kind of fill in some people that maybe weren't here, but write these in your notes. The mission of First Church of Christ is this, is to make disciples who make disciples. It's plain and simple. A disciple is a follower of Jesus Christ, and our goal and job and mission in life is to make disciples that make disciples. We need to keep passing this on, covering people with the dust of Jesus Christ, so that when they're fully covered, they can in turn do the same thing, go and make more disciples, and on and on and on it goes. How do we do this? Well, we talk about the 3 L's. The 3 L's, first of all, is to lead people to follow Jesus. That's what we're to do as a church, to go out and find people and lead them to follow Jesus Christ. Guess what? The church is so different today than it was 10, 20 years ago. It used to be like you could have this smorgasbord of programs and things for the kids and all this great stuff going on in the church building. Guess what? People aren't coming to church anymore. They're not coming here to check it out. Jesus is sending his church into the world and saying, go get them. Go fishing and lead them to Jesus Christ. So that's what we got to do. We'll be talking about how that's going to play out over the next couple months and years. So that's lead people to follow Jesus. Second, learn how to follow Jesus better. I don't know about you, but I don't know all there is to know about following Jesus, so I got to dig into this. I got to learn how to do that better, and I'm trying to get better at it, I'm not perfect. So how do I do that? Well, I get into his word and I study and I pray and do all this other good stuff. So together as a congregation, we got to learn, how do we follow Jesus better? And then finally, third, live as followers of Jesus every day. That's the tough part, isn't it? I get out of this place and I get out on the Worcester Road and people aren't driving the speed limit and I just want to cuss them out, I mean, come on. Let's get on the pedal here, But I need to leave this place and know how to live for Jesus every moment of my life. And that's hard to do, but as a congregation, as people of God, we're going to figure that out, right? That's what we got to do. So my goal is that I would be covered with the dust of Jesus so much that it would blow onto you, and that you, every single one of you, would be covered in the dust of Jesus Christ. Here's my question. Will you leave here today a little bit dirtier than when you walked in? Will you? That's what I want. That the dust of Jesus would just fully cover you. You'd go out into the world and people say, man, there's something different about you. That's what I want. Jesus was no ordinary teacher. He was no ordinary king, and he was no ordinary man. In Acts chapter 4, verse 12, Peter addresses the Sanhedrin. He says this, "Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to men by which we must be saved." And that name is Jesus. No ordinary man, not even extraordinary. He was a league all his own. Here's the deal. If you've decided to follow Jesus this morning, like, you're going to make this step and like, yeah, I'm going to do this. It's going to be hard. I can do it, but I want to step out and I want to follow him. I want to invite you to come forward as we sing our invitation song here in a minute. Maybe you've kind of been checking this out for a little while, and you're just kind of like, man, I don't know. It sounds good, but I don't know if I can really dive into it and give it my all. You know what I mean? And you keep saying, I got to straighten my life out first. I got things going on in my life, that I've got to get straight before I actually give my life to Jesus Christ and jump into this, No. Jesus accepts you right where you are. You might be poor. You might be struggling in your marriage. Your life might be a little chaotic right now. You're running here and there. You might think that you don't know enough about God. You might feel unworthy. Like, who am I? But if you think about the men that Jesus called to follow him, you've read about it in the story these last few weeks, these guys were pretty wild. Fishermen and workers, and these they didn't have their lives together. Jesus knew whom he was calling. He knew these guys didn't matter. Jesus just went to them and said, "Hey, come, follow me. We'll work it all out. It'll come. You guys will get this, but just come and follow me and we'll figure this out." And what'd they do? They dropped everything. They said, "All right, well, sure, why not? We'll follow you." And they followed in Jesus' footsteps. And they weren't perfect. You read the stories and you go, my goodness, these guys were idiots. They were dumb. But that's okay. That's okay, because what ended up happening was they got Jesus dust all over themselves. And they changed the world. What could God do with you today if you just step out and say, I'm going to follow Jesus? Get his dust on me. I think God could help you change the world.